Hi, everyone. So for everyone who doesn't know me, my name's Sean, and I'm the editor at Building Digital. So we're really happy today to welcome three expert speakers. And the topic of today's discussion is creating a golden thread of building safety information. Really important topic at the moment, especially in light of the Building Safety Act coming into effect this year. So just so you know, this call is being recorded, and it will be available on our website next week. So you can go back, and if there's anything you missed or you'd like to hear about more, you can go there. Just sign up for free membership on our website, and then you can view it there. So without further ado, I think we should get right into it. And first off, we have David Shepherd, who is product manager for the Houses of Parliament Restoration Renewal Programme at the House of Commons. David, good to see you again. Welcome to the event. When you're ready, please go ahead and share your screen and get stuck in.
Brilliant. So I'll just very quickly introduce myself. My name's David Shepherd, and I'm the digital product manager for the Restoration and Renewal Delivery Authority. The focus of that role is essentially developing digital construction tools. That's essentially leveraging BIM and the common data environment for the restoration and renewal of the parliamentary estate. I'm also the commissioned author by the RABA book for the BIM Management Handbook and an authorized Power Apps developer. And I do comment probably more than some people might find comfortable on LinkedIn and digital construction publications like Building Digital. Also former advisor to the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, and my background in design technology and construction. So I wanted to start by just throwing up this image here. This is really, for many people, a painful image, but an important one because it highlights the significance of what we're trying to do here. 72 lives lost, many of them children, many of them ethnic minorities. But the key thing to note is that if it could happen in Grenfell, then obviously it could be one of our members of our families, and hopefully those who are represented here didn't lose their loved ones in that fire. But the question we need to answer is, what will it take to keep them safe? That's what we're here to do. And the key part of that is the golden thread of information, isn't it? I guess the key thing that I want to highlight are some of the 10 points that we all know, but I'm trying to put them in layman's language. So one of the first ones is accurate and trusted, which means that we have robust and competent layers of scrutiny. We also need to be able to assure residents, which means that we have to explain safety in layman's language. We need a culture change, which means that there is a safety first ethos. And we need to have a single source of truth, which means that there is an audit trail, a common data environment, which means that we're not chasing around emails to find out what people committed to and did, and obviously having explicit accountability. And then, of course, it needs to be secure, so we have access control against that. What we also need to ensure is that there is, background noise, that there's non-repudiation by a legally accountable person. One of the things you see in Grenfell is that repudiation where people say, well, I didn't say this. So we have to have that non-repudiation. And of course, there needs to be an accountable person. It has to be understandable and consistent. So that means that the data needs to be logically structured. And it has to be simple to access, which means that the interfaces with that information need to be consistently organized. Otherwise, people will be constantly wondering what's the next step in what they need to do. It needs to be perpetual, durable, and shareable. And that means that this needs to sit across the data lifecycle between different owners. And that means it needs to be interoperable between those different owners. And finally, it needs to be relevant and proportionate, which means that the retention of that information is based on some kind of formal review. So what went wrong with Grenfell? I think it's important to do a bit of a retrospective with that. This was from Paul Hyatt, who's an expert with it on the Grenfell inquiry. And he says, it seems to me that another fundamental problem with this project was that a matrix of responsibilities under the design and build contractor were never properly established or managed. And what you can see there is that when in this contractual arrangement, Leadbitter was dropped because of the costs and so on, that there was a lack of clarity as to who was taking up responsibility for the design of the ultimate responsibility for the design of the facades. What we did know is that essentially these four parties started to have conversations about the costs. There was concerns expressed by the project management's consultants about the absence of control scope, late commitment to a defined construction budget, slow reaction to address and align cost plans. And as a result of that, the response was the value for money was regarded as a key driver. And Leadbitter, who were the original contractors, had come in with a tender that was 2.6 million higher than expected. They got ruled out of the scenario, and in came Ryden. And Ryden came with a tender which was much closer to a budget of 8.5 million. But then what we see is that Harley, who was subcontracted to do the facades, essentially said that instead of zinc, they could go for aluminium composite, and that could save just under, just over 400K. Ryden had a different number, but you could see that this was really setting out the direction for what was going to happen next. Ultimately, Studio E, who were the architects who were then novated to work for Ryden, said that they relied on the advice of appointed specialists and suppliers. Max Fordham said advice, this is to do with fire safety, had not been sought. And they even went as far as to say that such matters plainly fell outside of their responsibility. And Exova said, well, at the time of the employer's requirements, they had expert architects, so pushed it back to Studio E essentially. And so that's why it's so important to have an accountable person, because there's this constant repudiation of design responsibility that we see in this, this web of blame that ensued during the Grenfell inquiry. I'll just give you some examples here. One of the key parts of this was to do with the drawing register. I'm not going to read the whole of this, but essentially, Paul Hyatt, who was the expert witness, indicated the importance of having a complete and comprehensive drawing issue register. And what we see here, as you see in the graphic in the middle, is that, for instance, the information exchanges with building control were missing. We see that even though aluminium composite was substituted for zinc, zinc was still on the drawings. And there were numerous omissions and changes in drawings. There were omitted things like the service risers. There were issues with the fire ratings of doors that had been changed. And all of these contributed. There were also regulatory issues. Let's face it, that we've got class 0, and that's to do with the surface propagation of fire rather than the actual core. Thankfully, this obviously has been changed in the building regulations. But what that meant is that, as you can see there from the certification, that the class 0 was being applied to Reynobond PE, which was the one that essentially caused the fire. And in fact, in terms of the Euro classes, it had gone down from B to E as a result of an adverse reaction to fire. But this hadn't been reported because it was still class 0. There are also product accreditation issues. If you look at this, this is your value chain of construction. And let's look particularly at manufacture. And the two parties that are involved in doing the testing of these things. You had the CSTB, which is the French organization for the testing. And of course, you've got the BRE. On the other side of this, you can get a BBA, British Board of Agreement certificate, which says that essentially your product has been fully accredited. And of course, there's an information exchange between the manufacturer, in this case, Arconic, and these different parties. Obviously, the dependence on this, there are parties represented, Stephen Hamel, and so on, who depend on this being reliable information in order to have specifications for products and so on. And you've also got, admittedly, this is being placed by building control approvers, but you had improved inspectors, and you've got local authority building control and the building reg. But all it takes is that as those tests are going on and certificates are being issued, what happens in the case of an adverse test, as happened in 2005 with Rain and Bond? Well, of course, what's going to happen is that if the certificate continues, people rely on that information. And that's where the information management issue is really felt. And what you actually need is what you can see here right now, which is for there to be a withdrawal of any certification on the basis that a test has been failed. What we see in the case of Arconics was that the riveted system was an acceptable system. The issue really was with the cassette system. Yet Deborah French, who was part of Arconics, the UK sales manager, said that it was often used by customers as much as the riveted system. And yet we see in the actual inquiry that it was called an unorthodox fabrication of Rain Bond. And furthermore, that when there was an adverse test, that it was a rogue result. Of course, the question has to be asked whether that should have been done again. So the Building Safety Act 2022 imposes a legal duty to maintain and transfer comprehensive fire information. And what that means is that needs to be not just a responsibility matrix, but a legal accountability matrix. As you can see here, very specific individuals have been highlighted as having responsible for building regs compliance or fire certificate. Specific parties have a supporting role in conjunction with others in terms of coordinating the design team, in terms of fire stopping, and also the other features that you see listed here. But what's quite important is that Section 90 of the Building Safety Act imposes this legal duty. And you can see there, a person who without reasonable excuse contravenes subsection 2 or 4, which as you can see there relate to provide the information for the regulator, it says there commits an offence and is liable on summary conviction to imprisonment for a term not exceeding maximum summary term. So what we need to do is focus very clearly on what it means to have accountable and simple to access and shareable information. And what I'd like to highlight for you is FAIR principles, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Please look that up because this is crucial to what we're trying to do. There's something about fiery, not Mary, there's something about fiery. And the something is that as it stands, there are significant amendments that should be made in order to make it fit for purpose. I've highlighted some of these here, so I'm not going to go into too much detail with them, but I think it's something as a talking point to understand that there are needs for these amendments to be made. So the question then finally is how to get going today with the golden thread. What I'd like to do is just very quickly show to you, this is the COBE worksheet, as you can see. And you can see this is essentially the data model that sits behind it. What I've tried to do is to approach it in what we call an agile way, which means that we have time box advancements. We don't try to look at all the requirements, but specifically target some of those. So this is what I was able to set using Power Apps. As you can see here, this is the facility level. You've got information about the individual floors that sit within there. You can link to associated documents inside of this application. You can see here that you can drill down into a particular floor and then find the associated spaces and documents for the different floors in there. And you can also look at the systems level and you can identify in there that these are all connected within the same system. You can also filter a particular type as you'd expect to do. And as a result of that, you can identify a particular type of wall and then see all the information that's associated with it. As you drill down there, you start to see all the information. There's the BBA certificate. There's the information about the different wall types that sit within there. And these are some of the outputs that are stored within the SharePoint environment. You can also look at the individual assets. And as you can see, you can take photos of the assets and you can use all of these links. In terms of issue and risk register and change control, this is quite key. Some people will associate this with 19650-6 because that's also associated with health and safety. But what we've done here is to essentially implement a Power App, which allows you to then establish the risk register. There's an approval workflow so that any changes require approval before that they can actually be implemented. And the final piece of this is interoperability. Well, interoperability means that you can bring it down to a lowest common denominator. And as you can see here, because it's running on top of SharePoint, there's the ability to export the data that is stored in SharePoint. Alternatively, you can export the tables that underlie all of that data that you've just seen. So with about 17 seconds to go, I'd like to thank you for your time. And I'd also give you the link. Please feel to reach out to me and we can continue this conversation. Thank you once again.
Thanks so much, Dave. That's a great talk. And I think it's really, even you just had 15 minutes, really hit on a lot of the biggest issues. And I'm glad you also put it in connection with Grenfell, just to show how important all of this really is. So are there any questions out there for Dave? Anyone wants to put a question on the presentation? Okay,
I
think
don't be shy.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
can you hear me now?
Yeah,
yes, can hear
Mark,
you.
go
Mark.
ahead.
Yeah.
David, good morning. Firstly, congratulations, really good presentation. A lot of this stuff's well on point. And also, best wishes to you and your team on a momentous project you're undertaking. Good luck with that one. Did you get my building plans I sent you for a PIB box, David?
I did. And unfortunately, the pressure of the workload that I'm under hasn't made it easy for me to respond to that. I think there's a way to respond to this, and it's quite important. There's a data side of this, and then there's a documentation side of this. And I think that there's a balancing act between those things. The great thing about documents is that they essentially have legal standing, and making sure that you have all of those things are quite important. I think the other challenge of this is having a system that has searchable data. In other words, as much as a PDF might have the date that that particular document was signed, might also have the person who signed it and also the particulars. It's not as searchable as having a database that complements that, which is searchable as well. So I think there's a balancing act between having a good store of all this good documentation with marked up drawings and so on. I did look at those and so on. But I think the other piece of it is, how do we balance that with having a searchable database that essentially is married up to that, which is coupled to that, so that I don't necessarily have to open the drawing to be able to find the information. I can actually search the database. So I think there's a challenge there.
I think you can link pretty much any CAD software with a searchable database. That technology has been around for a while. What I can't understand is the promotion and the use of essentially a Kobe document as fiery. Because, hear me out on this one, David.
No, I'm smiling. I'm smiling. I don't think my smile is incredulity. I'll explain. Go ahead. Make your point, please.
So, when you're looking at building data and you're looking at graphics, the two things separately, I agree with you wholeheartedly about the BIM integration and the data integration in the future. But I think one thing that's been overlooked is the fire service said on the recent amendment that they want paper in the PIBs so they can use them in an interactive dynamic environment, which is an incident situation. Yeah. So you've got a combination of two things, one presenting it for the fire service to use and building owners to understand. Yeah. Simplicity, there's a simple bit you're talking about, and then the fully comprehensive data behind it. But I think you can link pretty much any CAD software into relational databases. In fact, Revit in itself is a relational database, and you're exporting to a dumb spreadsheet to then import back into another relational database, which is your asset management system. Why not map the two bits of software together? Why go down to Kobe, then back up to a relational asset management system? Why not link the two software?
I'm going to look at this from two perspectives. One of them is going to be, firstly, to say I agree with you, because I actually do agree with you on this. But then I'm going to, the devil's advocate piece is something that I've contended with in some of the pieces I've put on LinkedIn. And that's that there is this fear of being outside a system. So the assumption is that, an example is file naming. I have always been a big fan of using metadata to essentially organize and control, different deliverables and so on. No, it's all going to be explicit in the file name. And then when you say to somebody, well, why is that the case? They say, oh, because when it sits outside of your system, it still has to be distinguished. So therefore, we have explicit file naming. I think that a lot of this thinking, and I'm not saying I'm not a fan of Kobe, I'm simply saying that a lot of this again comes down to this lowest common denominator thinking, which is the lowest common denominator is a spreadsheet. So guess what? We're going to put all the data in a spreadsheet. The fact that, as you say, there's a transaction cost in bringing it into somebody else's system is almost like, well, no, I've just produced the output that you want. And therefore, your issue is absolutely, your point is well taken, because what's not thought about is the interoperability. It's great to be able to export to that format, but if it's not interoperable with anything else, then it's not really going to go anywhere. One last bit is to do with the importance of the drawing. I think the reason why Kobe doesn't particularly fit is because essentially the focus of Kobe was to provide essentially an organized set of structured data about managed assets, maintainable
materials.
Assets. Right, and it's, but the maintainable assets typically are FFE. They sit within a particular space. So that's why you then have obviously the floor space zone hierarchy. The problem is that when you think about a wall, especially a structural wall, what space does it belong to? And that's why my take has been that instead of tracking that by spaces, which absolutely doesn't make any sense, you use IDs. And because of the power, as you say, that database power that you have within tools like Revit and in CAD, you can actually provide somebody with a plan that, one, can be color coded to show things like compartmentation and so on. But also, if you do have to tag things with a unique ID, that ID will correlate to the database and potentially to the fiery information. But it's important that the ID is what you're tracking rather than the fact that it belongs to a particular space. Walls don't necessarily belong to a particular space. Floors don't necessarily belong to a particular space. Yeah, but your point's well taken.
Yeah, I think the interoperability thing, what I'm really talking about here is the fire service and building owners are your target.
Yeah.
Okay, not the system of main contractor, architect, consulting engineer, etc. But I've looked at it from the point of view of building owners. So our designs are designed for building owners to understand easily, but also it's related to the fire service as well. So that quick look at what they've got. And this is no denigration of the data side, because I think that should all be behind there.
Yeah.
But it's the front end that building owners and the fire service look at that is the critical element to acceptability by building owners. You've got to sell it to them, and it's got to be usable by them. And these are complex tools used by specialists.
Yeah,
Revit, for instance, maybe 10% of the market, whereas AutoCAD has about 70% of the market. How many building owners do you know have access to Revit or the ability to use it? Very few. So,
I don't think people need to necessarily have those. That's not the fundamental. I mean, nothing that you've seen in terms of what I showed you needed me to use Revit. This SharePoint, I'd argue that
open
probably
access.
SharePoint, and most people, businesses would have access to a SharePoint platform in some way. I don't think it's prohibitively expensive and so on. The question about the point that I think I'd support you on is the fact that because that second part of the golden thread is residence assurance, you have to simplify in order that your residents association can understand the integrity of your fire safety approach. And I think it's quite important to get that buy-in. It's not just a case of specialists like fire engineers and architects and so on being able to understand this. We have to do better than Grenfell. We have to make this easy for people to understand why this building is safe. Yeah, why the building that we've designed is safe.
Okay,
Is there...
the interoperability thing you're talking about, David, we work with a lot of housing associations, and not going to bang on my own drum, but in about a week's time, there'll be a full brochure of a full series of plans we're going to be issuing to market, but it includes a horizontal and combined vertical evacuation plan for high-rise, specifically designed for residents, PEEPS documents noted against flat numbers, etc. It doesn't exist in the industry at the moment, so we're developing and hopefully we'll be issuing in a week if anybody's interested. It's a brand new plan, and I think it's going to be on point, because they asked the industry to step up. Well, this is me stepping up and our company to help. And, you know, I'd like to have an input. Grenfell had such an impact on me watching that. It's all our worst nightmares.
And
so, I think we want to do stuff.
There is a need for the coalition of the willing. I'm mindful of Sean in terms of timescales and others who might want to chip in at this stage. Are there any others who might have some questions about the approach that I've taken or some of the challenges? Feel free to jump in. Somebody is, anybody else?
I mean, just to zoom out a little bit, Dave.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to mute there. Zooming out a little bit, I mean, a lot of the Building Safety Act, it requires basically along the whole supply chain and to redo things. And how does that work in existing buildings? I mean, a lot of the buildings that are out there right now are built in ways that aren't safe and are not future-proofed. So what would you recommend as some of like a first step for building operators to comply with these regulations in existing buildings, and where would the money come from?
Well, I think that firstly there's this whole question of the levy, which is partly a political question, which I can't get into obviously, but there's a question of how it is funded in terms of the work that needs to be done and so on. And I think that that's still a moot point that needs to be debated. However, in the case of existing buildings, I think that very often people don't realize that maybe the first thing to do is to begin to organize what you have already. Even if those things might be, you know, fire safety plans and strategy, the fire strategy, the information that's going to be needed by the emergency services in case of fire, all of that just needs to be, don't wait for creating a database or for something, you know, to simply some proprietary solution to begin to organize that information. I think the other piece of it is ultimately it's the people side, is to identify an individual who has that role of building safety manager and then say, it is your task, you're being paid to begin that process of organizing this information. Having something organized is better than leaving things in disarray. So I think in that context, and I suppose the other piece of this is going to be the need for a fire safety audit. I think for people to know what is the state of that building in terms of, you know, in terms of doors, in terms of fire dampers, in terms of kitchen extracts. These are all things that really there should be a comprehensive annual audit against these buildings. Yes, it costs money, but I think the question isn't can you afford to, it's can you afford not to, considering what the consequences are. Yeah,
fair enough.
Can I make a quick point?
Sorry, Mark, I'm just aware of time in terms of scaling on to the next presentation, but please feel free to just type something out in the chat if you want to. And you can also message Dave directly.
No,
but yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to make the point that the first thing you need before you make any fire strategy for a building is clear and accurate drawings that represent your building. I think that's what's missing from existing. So that's the first thing you need to do. Okay,
great. Thanks a lot, Mark. So next up, we're going to have Stephen Hamill, who I'd like to invite to share his screen when he is ready.
Okay, give me 1 second. Pardon me. Let's get the right slide deck up. Share screen. And then if somebody can confirm they can see my screen okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Nice one. And I've got the chat open on a second window, so if everybody doesn't mind if they can mute their microphones, but if they do have questions that they're thinking as the presentation progresses, pop them in the chat and I'll remember to pick them up at the end. So my presentation's going to focus on maybe a narrow part of building safety. It's going to be the specification side. So we've talked a lot about drawings and 3D models in the breakouts there, but this is the specification that goes like behind the visual information you see on the drawings. My name's Stephen Hamill, Innovation Director at NBS, been at NBS over 20 years now, worked on all of our specification manufacturer product platforms. And if you do want to reach out to me after, just search around my name in either Twitter or LinkedIn, and you can message me there after the presentation. So we'll have a quick look at the golden thread, then we'll look at specification, then we'll look at manufacturer product information, how that fits into the golden thread. So yeah, 50 minutes. Let's get going. I was actually on the government website this morning, just looking at the guidance around the Building Safety Act, and as it went from the bill to the act and got the royal assent, quite a lot of what's been published has been like redacted now because the guidance will be enhanced and improved. But this is sort of a live sort of schedule of where we are. So like last April, got royal assent, turned from a bill to the act, and then there's some sort of quite significant milestones over the first year and then the second year. Things like golden threads or full definition, gateways 2 and 3, construction product regulation, changes to architects registration board. So it's a real sort of full plan there. In terms of golden thread and the different gateways, I actually chaired the sort of subgroup. It was called the golden thread committee that was under the BRAC. It was an initiative by L&Q, and we're working with the building regs committee. So we're putting that subgroup put in a lot of recommendations, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out in that sort of secondary legislation and the transition period. But dumb it all down, if you like. And this is looking at new builds. I know the existing buildings are sort of another conversation. But in a new build, you think of the RIBA plan of work, that I think the gateways where the information needs to be collected and recorded are quite significant parts of the Building Safety Act. So it talks about planning gateway 1, and that's live at the moment. I've got a couple of examples to show in a second. And then there's a gateway 2 and a gateway 3, which are quite significant, like quite significant sort of, here's all the information, and then it can get updated due to conditions and things as you go through construction. But the sort of gateway 2, and I've highlighted some of the things that came from the initial guidance, things like detailed plans, detailed specifications, how change controls can be managed, how the information is all going to be coordinated. And then that key, which is maybe not focused on as much as it should be at the moment, that sort of record handover, information record. So that might have been what was designed, but what was actually built, what was actually the products that went into the building, what was varied, etc. All the certifications. So sort of 3 significant points there. Looking purely at specifications, a great place to start in terms of principles around good specification is the construction playbook. I haven't included URLs here because, again, you can just Google this. going to Google, construction playbook, government website. But they had a whole sort of subsection of this document just giving good principles and why specifications are important, what to do, what not to do. And just sort of like logical structure, define your terms. It's addressing the contractor already, so don't write the contractor must at every single stage, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's some good sort of base principles there from government. At NBS, it's been our core business for 50 years. NBS stands for National Building Specification back from 1973. But on that sort of standard structure, classification, essential. If you've got more than one type of system, a sort of project unique code. And then in that specification, even if you just consider it as a bit of paper or the PDF that comes sort of out of the spec writing software, a section in the specification for each system which gives an outline, a sort of table of contents into what the system is, and then what that sort of performance, if you think of the overall system, so if it was something like a partition, what's the overall fire performance, acoustic performance, security performance, but in a sort of standard subsection of the spec. And then what products go together to produce that performance. We've got an MEP example on the screen here, but if think of a partition, what plasterboard framing, insulation, fire stopping, etc. is needed to create that overall performance that you want. And then, of course, it's not just the quality of products, it's the quality of the work itself. There's no point in buying the perfect fire door if it doesn't close properly, or you haven't got enough hinges on and it sort of comes loose, etc. So the quality of execution, the quality of handover information that's needed, and then finally, what maintenance information is required to be developed as well. And a combination of all that together supplements the drawings, supplements the building contract, the prelims, and that's the contractual information that needs to be recorded, needs to be tracked, so that there's that sort of reference point. If there's a query, if heaven forbid something goes wrong, you can go back to and say, look, this is the documentation, cross-reference and standards, etc. Coding's extremely important because you're going to have hundreds of these systems, maybe thousands of products. So at MBS, we'd recommend the uniclass classification structure. Can, of course, use common arrangement of work sections if you wish as well. And then if you've got more than one type of the same thing, you're going to have more than one type of, probably going to have, I don't know, you could have 1,000 instances of doors of 12 different types, have a clear coding system for the types that complement the classifications. And David talked a little bit about design responsibility. Absolutely, before the technical design stage starts, make it crystal clear whether it's going to be the designer working for the client that has the design responsibility, or it's going to be more of a performance spec, performance design, and it's going to be part of a specialist subcontractor package. So really important on the planning. And drawings can only convey so much information, so make sure that the classification strategy, the annotations on any drawings, whether they're 2Ds, 3Ds, or whether they're codes inside a 3D model, it all aligns. You don't have a silo for the specification and a silo for the drawn and the scheduled information. So I've gone through quite fast here, but loads more information on our website if you want to go to any of this in detail. So looking at specification through the timeline, a little bit of a reminder of those gateways, planning, end of technical design, prior to construction, and then handover. Let's just look quickly at planning gateway 1. There's a template. I don't think it has changed since July 2021. That's available now on Gov UK. And that's just a Word document, but it's a well-structured Word document. And it allows you to sort of specify the intent in terms of fire strategy, looking at that sort of really high level. So what I did actually, as part of the MBS family of companies, we have Glenigan, and I looked through some of the Glenigan information for tall buildings that are being designed right now, being constructed right now, so big tens of £1 million projects, and just look through what's in the public domain on the planning portals for current fire statements. And the information I found, this is a real project. I don't name the project here, But this is the template document from GovUK, and they've made it project specific. And you see the level it's at. We're not talking about specific systems or products yet. It's like, what is the strategy for the external walls or for the balconies, for suppression, etc. So if you are interested in seeing this sort of thing in more detail, if you're a subscriber to Glenigan, you can actually go and see what's been submitted in the public domain, or you can just go to the planning portals and have a little look around as well. But some interesting stuff there in terms of Gateway 1, which is already in place. Gateway 2, I'm just going to go through the sort of principles in terms of specification, but you're going to take that fire strategy and work out the different systems and the different systems that come together to achieve what's needed. So from the design, you'll be thinking, okay, there's 6 or 7 different door set types here, and you've got that sort of overall performance requirements for each one to the relevant standards. And you'll be determining who's going to take the design responsibility to achieve those performance requirements. Are you writing a performance spec, which is then going to ideally get turned into a prescriptive spec by a specialist subcontractor before that part of the building is constructed? Or is the designer going through prescribing the solution? So descriptive spec, you're specifying the performance, and then specialist subcontractors are taking the responsibility to pick the products that meet that performance, whereas with a prescriptive specification, the designer's sort of fully designing that. And just looking for an extract from a typical specification, there's no way in the world you put all this information on a drawing. There's also the execution as well. So in parallel with the drawings on the model, you'd be specifying to a particular standard, down to things like the door closers. We talked about Revit earlier. You almost certainly aren't going to be modeling door closers, but that would be referenced from the drawings to the specification. And you could specify a particular manufacturer product, or you could invite proposals based on the sort of generic spec. Big discussion over the last 4 or 5 years is substitution. It's always a good idea to see what it says about proposed substitutions in the construction contracts, and then read the prelims and see the greater detail. So if a designer has proposed a product and the contractor wants to propose a different one, what are the rules as defined in the contract, and how is that going to be recorded? And then finally, certification, so important. Like, you want a specification to a particular technical characteristics, you want it installed to a particular standard. Does that particular manufacturer have a certificate that backs up their claims? We look at the product information a little bit later. And then, yes, we all talk about products all the time, but in our little subgroup that looked at this, many of the reasons why door sets failed, and again, just focus on door sets, short presentation, was not through it being the wrong product, but it was the right product installed incorrectly. So just a little set of 9 or 10 common mistakes found. Each one could mean that that performance wasn't met, not because it was a bad product, but because badly executed on site. And then specifications will change. They'll change the work in progress stage, and then there will be variations through the construction phase. And it's so important that these are actually documented. Who was the person that approved it? Who was the person that issued it? Can you quickly find it through good naming convention and classification, etc.? But just like drawings, just like Word documents, specifications will change. And it's important, whatever software package you use, that they're tracked and you have the relevant metadata associated with this. So final little part here, I'm racing through this in 15 minutes. Product information, I would strongly recommend reading the Construction Product Association's Code for Construction Product Information. At MBS, we sort of co-research this with our market research team, talking to the industry, saying, look, how can manufacturers be better when in terms of really clearly showing their product information? And the CPA plus the working group produced a code which had sort of 11 different clauses on the basic principles about how manufacturers create that information, what core information they should make publicly available, things like the technical characteristics, the third-party certifications, guidance on application, classification, associated information, installation manuals, operations manuals, maintenance manuals, warranties, etc. And then easy technical support from the manufacturer as well. So it's just all common sense stuff that came from a survey of 400 or 500 construction professionals saying, this is the information we want from manufacturers. And that should be there on manufacturer websites. How we help manufacturers at NBS, just a little short video here. We have a platform called NBS Source with 1,200 manufacturers. And one example here, which goes against these good principles, is like, when was the last time the manufacturer verified this information, took responsibility for it? How do you get technical support? Does it have third-party certification? What's the guidance in terms of suitable application? So is this particular insulation board for pitch roofs, or is it for cavity walls or what have you? How is it classified, uniclass and common arrangement? What are the technical characteristics as defined in the relevant standard, using the terms and the units from that particular standard? Maybe not important for today, but sustainability information, where's it sourced? Does it have an EPD, embodied carbon, etc.? Installation manuals, and then evidence again on that third-party certification as well. So that's there in the public domain, easy to find, NBS Source there. On our data model, we model variance. So a 200 mil product is going to have a different thermal resistance to a 100 mil product. And yeah, they're at the fingertips. I think that the last thing to mention, the ease to add it into a specification. If you're using Microsoft Word, you could copy and paste the text. If you're using NBS, you can just copy that object if you like. It's non-visual object. Just click paste and drop that straight into the specification where you have those QA controls in terms of revisions and sort of ownership. So I think that's about 15 minutes at breakneck pace. Yeah, reach out to me if you want to know more about anything I presented today. So if you're an architect or an engineer that writes specs, drop me a line. If you're a main contractor that receives specifications and wants to make sure they're like you're really sort of managing your design partners to give you the information you need, get in touch, or a manufacturer. You can search for NBS Source in Google and find it. And we have a free set of sample specifications in both Uniclass and Cores. So if you want just a free set of PDF finished off specifications, get in touch and I'll email you those. So I think I'll probably stop. I'm not sure. I think I'll keep sharing my screen in case I need to demonstrate anything, but I'll just look at, see if there's any questions coming in. So there's one that David sent, but is a sort of direct message, but I don't think it's private. So I'll just read it out. There's two questions. Did this need to be a more robust submittals process? And yes, I think they really should. I'm going to go back a few slides on that one. So if you look at the specification structure here, where's it gone, the specification structure slide? But at each sort of subsection of that, there will be submittals that are required. So if you think of, if it's going to be a performance spec and you want to have the prescriptive spec sent backwards, there'll be submittal requirements here saying submit the design to whatever standard and show evidence of all the products and lead times, etc. That can't just get hidden in the PDF. It's got to be extracted and put into that common data environment in terms of a tracking system. Yeah. When you specify products, it might be submit proposals on the product themselves. That can't be hidden in the PDF. It's got to be there with dates against it. Execution will be things, I don't know, test the cube strength or test the acoustics or what have you. These are all jobs that need to be submitted. And I think it doesn't have to be as good as the US system. It has to be better than the US system. We've got spec content for North America, for Australia, and we've got to digitalize this information in the specification with flags. We're looking at that at MBS, so you can push those tasks into whichever task management system You have, and then there's a sort of question also about how do you trust that product information? And I think what we do at MBS is we just shine a light on it. So the manufacturer provides it, the manufacturer signs it off, the manufacturer confirms when was the last time they verified that. So we're providing the vehicle to put the specifier or the building owner in touch with the manufacturer in a transparent way. But in terms of testing that information, it has to be the third-party certification. And we haven't got a basement at MBS where we test the acoustic ratings or the security ratings or the fire ratings of a door and stamp it. We just shine the light on the information that they provide.
I guess a quick question, follow on, and I don't mean to interrupt the other things that people are putting in the chat, was essentially, how is a failed fire test communicated? Because this was one of the key issues, that there was the 2005 test of the CSTM that was failed with, and how does that, what's the information link that makes sure that even if a manufacturer goes rogue and says, well, okay, let's discard that one, is there some sort of Intel connection, or is that something that's envisaged so that you get to know something that maybe the manufacturer, or does it really essentially depend on the integrity of the manufacturer?
No, it's a great question. I think it's a question that doesn't just apply to construction, but we can look at how other industries do it. Like, I went into Sainsbury's last year and there was literally a sign blue tacked at the door saying the following products have found whatever bits of glass, and however, if you got them, please return them to the store. Because they don't know who's taking that product back. And I think car industry probably does it best, where they actually know who's bought the car, what year engine it is, or what have you. And if there's a problem, they can recall the cars. I think for some of the real complex systems like lift systems and escalators, the manufacturer themselves will, because it comes with the service contract, etc., they'll know if there's a fault, which buildings it's in, and how to recall and fix the problem. But it's something that the industry's got to do better, and it's something I think we will do better, because the information is going into the cloud. And I think that way of notifying and putting recall messages is technically possible now, and it's something we should aim for in the next few years. It always seems to be the car industry that does it best, but we can learn from other industries there, I think, David.
Yeah. Absolutely, thank you.
We have another question from Thomas Lindner. About how does product tagging and tracking come into product specification? So, for example, GS1 or ETIM.
Yeah, no, really good question, Thomas, and it's one that we've looked at over the years. Let me just jump right at the end where we had the product information sequence. So for this particular product you see on the screen, we've got a little GUID behind there, that little link that you can copy with the clipboard, and you can include those GUIDs in a barcode, in an RFID, and we're going to keep that product information sort of live over the years, and say when it's been replaced, keep a copy of things like the O&M manual. So if you were somebody on site, and again, we're putting the foundations in place for the future here, you could scan the RFID card inside a door set and jump straight to this website that has all of the technical information and associated information like PDF manuals, etc. The ETIM initiative is very similar to what we're doing, where you look at the standards, you get the technical characteristics, and you create that language. So we have been in touch with the guys that do ETIM in the UK to see in particularly on the M&E equipment, we can align that a little bit. And Rachel's saying, yeah, construction recall, etc. It's something that we need to get better at, and I don't think it's a million miles away right now. And then Mohammed's made some comments on product recall as well, and put a useful hyperlink to Northumbria University website. I don't know. Oh yes, Mo from BIM Academy we've met a few times. Definitely put a shout out to BIM Academy. Do great research and lots and lots of topics around sort of digital construction, digital asset management. Feel free if anyone just wants to stick their microphone on or video and make a comment as well. But
Yeah.
I'm checking chat as we go here.
Anyone else have questions for Stephen? Hi, Rachel.
Stephen.
Oh, sorry.
Go
Hi,
to
John.
Rachel.
Rachel, did you have a question?
Oh, am I going first? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, no, it was just really to say, sorry, I joined a little bit late, but obviously my interest was really around the product identification within the systems that you got there, the chorus, etc. And really, it's already been, a couple of the questions already been asked, obviously from Thomas, and then what David's just said before around, you know, being able to track and trace, and obviously being able to identify that product, which really is, for people that aren't aware, that GS1 UK are obviously in construction doing that and explaining how that now works. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to catch up with Stephen and just kind of talk about how that's kind of within your platform and discuss that, because I think it's relevant to kind of also look at how we can promote that a bit more. That would be great.
That sounds. I've looked at GS1 a couple of times over the last 10 years or so, so it'd be great to put a face to it, Rachel, and have a catch up. I've just direct messaged you my email address.
Perfect, thank you.
If you drop me an email back, it'd be great to have a call.
Yeah, that's great.
And that applies to anybody. If they want to direct message an email address, more than happy to have a follow-up call. Thank you, Thomas.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. I think we can move on to our next presentation. I'm just a bit aware of time. We're going to cut out the breakout room. I don't think it's really necessary. I think it would be great if we could get right into the next presentation, which is from John Ryan, the CEO and co-founder of Simterra. John, welcome today. It's great to have you. Good to see you again. And feel free to share your screen if you have a presentation. If you're talking off the cuff, then you also, the stage is yours.
Yeah, for those that know me talking off the cuff will last a few hours, so let's not do that one. So let's try and share something.
Yep, I can see your screen.
Gone full screen?
Yep.
Yeah, good, Bill.
Good, thanks.
Great. Thanks for having me today. So, good morning. My name is John Ryan. I am a senior, or I was a senior project manager on many projects in the past, but now I'm a co-founder of Simterra, which is a construction technology company located here in London. By trade, I'm a chartered engineer. Before starting Simterra, I've worked on Tideway Super Sewer. I've been engineering managers on various different projects for Crossrail, TfL, Underground, and even onto high-rise buildings with Langer work, engineering and project management kind of roles. I've been lucky enough to spend my career working on complex projects. So over 15 years, I've had the opportunity to start a few from scratch. This has meant I've always had a focus on best practice in terms of engineering and information management. At the very basics, if you get these right up front, you at least know where to find things when you do need them on a project. So given that Dave and Stephen have covered the first 50 slides of my presentation better than I could, I've actually had to go off and cut mine down to the last 3 points. The focus of these is on information basics. So whether you're working on a £1 million project all the way up to a billion mega project, the commonality between them are quite similar. And as mentioned, I come from a delivery background here. I'm going to go and focus on those issues that we all experience on live projects. So starting with where to start and ending in what you get out of it at the end of a project. So let's start with some honesty here. Nobody got into the construction industry to do paperwork. When any one of us looked at a construction site as a child, none of us dreamed of doing paperwork and process flow charts or the thrill of the chase of getting 20 signatures in a document by Friday. We're an industry of driven people. We want to do great jobs. We want to work with big diggers and big cranes and build something that we can be proud of. What has changed, though, is that not all buildings now are built equally. We have seen an ever-increasing level of complexity in construction to design and deliver bigger, more impressive buildings, supported by a global supply chain. To carry out these works safely, we need to meet new and more complex and stringent specifications and legal requirements. However, despite the increased level of building complexity, the same cannot be said about supporting processes to enable this. And one of the common root causes of this for building failures is information management, enabling the right people to have the access to the right information at the right time to make the right decisions. In terms of data management failures, there are 4 key factors. Data is incomplete, incorrect, outdated, or simply absent. Or simply put, who has it? Where is it? Can I get hold of it? And is that all of it? And in the end, typically, it's quicker and safer to go off and resurvey without making a decision on doing some works. So despite having done my best to find historical data on Camden Town Station years ago, we still hit voids and structural issues outside of our control. It delayed the works, increased costs, and ultimately hit the morale of the team on the ground as they were trying to go off and do the best job they could. So really, the information management strategy is no longer just a tick box exercise. Whether it's a mega project or a fit out, each project is unique, and projects and companies develop their own systems and structures to comply with internal process procedures, client requirements, and industry standards. Each stakeholder would have their own requirement processes and procedures or their own information management system. So think about local councils in terms of planning applications, traffic management plans for local groups as well. And the project itself may take many years to complete. And at that time, there'll be numerous companies and people involved, subcontractors, etc., each adding their own updates to their project history. And the result of all this is a record of work spread across multiple offices, teams, companies, and lots of engineers' attics and memory sticks in kitchen drawers across the country. So let's be honest, this sounds hard and expensive, and there's a lot to take on board. And as I said before, none of us joined the industry to do paperwork. And whether you're starting from scratch or have 50 years of data in storage from microfilm records to holograms and digital twins, whether you're in the planning phase or the middle of the project, today is always a good day to get started on the basics. And to get the basics right will let you win at admin and help you, your team, and projects work faster, safer, and more efficiently. The basics are needed through all stages that Stephen ran us through earlier, from strategic definition to handover. And simply, it comes down to 3 things to consider when looking at any information management system: how you capture information, how you store it, and then how do you find that project information when you need it. So looking at capture, this is the most critical stage. And if you get this right, it sets you up for success everywhere else. You need to make it simple to capture information in your project, not just for your team, but everyone involved, from clients to subcontractors. So when I was structuring the information management system on Tideway, we were building a tunnel with 120-year design life, which meant I had to think of what IT systems our great-great-grandchildren would have to use to access our original project data. And simply, it came down to 3 guiding principles. Let's use best practice guidance and non-proprietary industry standards and formats, such as the FAIR principles that Dave mentioned earlier, which goes around findability, accessibility, interoperability, and the reusability of the digital assets. We also have uniclass codes, which Stephen covered earlier on, and where possible, a document naming convention as well that kind of gives a standardization throughout the project. And core of this was to avoid proprietary systems. Custom built software solutions we have seen over the years have continually failed us. They do not allow the ease of sharing of data. They take too long to set up. They cost a lot to maintain, and they are not going to be around in 100 years' time. Complication of any system is going to be your enemy, and you will alienate your team. Construction projects are mostly done by engineers. Engineers love complexity, and this is a big problem to go off and fight against. The simplest system is a form-filling system that links to a spreadsheet. Google Forms and Google Sheets is one of the more popular solutions that captures data easily and allows you to reuse information in other ways. The forms themselves are the source of many issues. And to share what we've learned from Centera is that with over 100 companies working with us, we have seen that tick box questions and yes/no questions in forms are really not your friends. They give the impression of quality assurance, but they lead to users simply ticking the right answer each time without doing the assessment the question are meant to fulfill. So instead of having 20 questions, ask them a question, get them to enter their assessment. Is the site fit for purpose to undertake the works? Can they proceed with the works? Have they got the right information to hand? And instead of hundreds, thousands of yes/no questions and answers in your database, you'll get real insights to your project and be able to leverage that then for future works and learn from that as you go on, thus improving efficiencies and safety on your jobs. And finally, one source of the truth. We always keep saying this on projects. When we finish a project, we're always saying we wish we had that. If we can start everybody on the same system and instill a culture of encouraging team members to record works daily, it will, from the very beginning, it will be a big change within your business. If it needs, you can push data from BIM systems and schedules into common data environments automatically for those on the larger, more complex projects. But at a very simple level, having this in place means that everyone's default position to go to is this one bucket of information. Make it too complicated or limit access, and you reduce the effectiveness of what you're trying to achieve. So storage and sharing, and this really only has 3 functions: storing of information, the sharing of it, and reuse of information. And by that, I mean the ability to find what you need and reuse or repurpose it later on for what future requirements you have. Ignore the above, and you'll end up with a vast amount of systems, places to find and lose data, and lots of procedures to just save meeting minutes. In the end, let's be honest, I'm just going to write the meeting minutes on an email, send it out to the relevant people, and at best, I might save it to my desktop, thus losing a vast amount of information because I just don't have time to work with a complex system. One project I worked on years ago mandated 1,400 folders for the project itself, and it only contained about 5,000 documents. It was impossible to find anything. It was time consuming. And if you don't have fancy IMS, information management systems, in place, Dropbox or OneDrive work fine to keep the basics. I just kind of outlined there on the right-hand side a project folder structure that you could use. It's not perfect, but it's a start. You have your key project data folder that we share to all people on the project. It's read-only, so nobody can change it except for the owner. Health and safety documentation, project specifications, drawings, your project risk register, and also your project's process procedure. So everybody is starting on the same hymn sheet and understands why different things are going on. The contractor folder is for them then to go off and manage and provide updates to yourself. You can put your contract documents in there so they know exactly what their deliverables are. Progress reports, site diaries, weekly, monthly reporting, inspections, audits, all can go in there. Your RAMs, which we always need to go off and see as either the client organization or principal contractors. Very importantly, your change management, which then drives into your as-builds, and finally, commissioning and handover documentation, which can be then rolled up into the final handover to the authorized person who's going to be managing the building. And then this, in turn, as Dave mentioned earlier on, can be shared then with the local residents to better understand what's their risk profile of their building and what's going on with it. Then on to sharing. Now, if you lock your data away and you're not able to share it internally easily with stakeholders or with clients, it's really frustrating. And it typically leads to people like myself to copy the information out, modify and email it to the relevant people I need to work with without possibly updating the original copy. And this leads then to multiple versions of the same document. It leads to trackers that we all know and love, and lots of Excel spreadsheets. One job that we was working on before, we had 5 trackers for engineering deliverables, and every Friday morning we used to sit down for 2 or 3 hours just to go off and restructure all that instead of having one source of the truth on this one. It was, frankly, to be honest with you, soul destroying. The ability for us to go off and import and export data and share information ensures data portability. It's a critical thing to move forward on. But whether it's for project handover or sharing across teams, it needs to be a central tenet of any good system that you're considering using or looking to migrate to or upgrade. And finally, reuse. Now, sharing is great until you have to continue modifying, edit, and clean up information. So think about it as having 20 site diaries on site. At the end of the week, you're having to look through the 20 and do an updated report on what was the week's progress. Now, if you can capture it in a way that can be imported to Excel, Power BI, dashboards, etc., then you can have these weekly, monthly dashboards with real-time information, which will greatly reduce your admin time. Project photos, reports, and updates can be used again and again to share it internally with clients and external stakeholders to promote your job, to share good practice and lessons learned. So finding. Now, I know Dave mentioned earlier on SharePoint. We've had horror stories with SharePoint. It's getting better, but it's no use having the fanciest forms and trends and trendiest storage spots if you can't find anything when you need it. Start with a simple folder structure, and it's still good practice to run file names. Ideally, if you can, have a naming convention in place if you're lucky enough to have a dedicated project control team. Keep it very simple on the ground and ensure that everybody has access to the right information. Have a drawing or document register. A simple one in Excel that was shown on one of the previous presentations would help people to find the latest versions of documents instead of trawling through different folders and systems. If you can capture progress updates and day diaries using forms instead of Word and Excel and other bits and pieces directly, you can use that then to sort, filter, and cut up information to organize the data better, to share it with right people, and be able to go off and optimize your working life and stuff. As opposed, avoid custom or proprietary systems that don't enable you to have access to data that your team has put so much effort into capturing. It is, after all, your data, and it's not theirs. A simple rule is, if you can't access it in Excel, then something is not working well. Your team is there to deliver a project, not to develop an IT system. And typically, we've seen some problems on projects where the project decided to go off and customize and have a great solution on it, but it was 6, 12, 18 months before it got implemented. And by that point, you've lost the first year and a half of information that's still in testing. Everything should be Excelable. Now, as we all know, tomorrow is Friday. The end of the month report must be generated on projects across the country. And next week, we'll have meetings about these reports. But let's be honest, nobody ever shouted across an office for the latest monthly dashboard to make an important decision. But this can change. No need to spend the last 5 months collating data for PowerPoint presentations that nobody reads. It is there ready for you at your fingertips in real time to look at it first thing in the morning and then to start analyzing it and making better decisions. Once you get into a system like Excel or Power BI, etc., you can then better master your ability to find, reuse, report, and repurpose the vast amounts of information that your teams are generating and be able to go off and help them work better. Dashboards, instead of being the bane of your life, can actually enable your team to focus on spotting trends and issues around opportunities in real time and really add a lot of value to your project. Now, final part, what's in it from me? And typically we see people of, I'm too busy for all this and it's somebody else's job anyway. And we go back to why we joined the industry, and it wasn't for the paperwork. And nobody has ever gotten praised for a fabulous job of how neat they keep their folders. We focus on the physical works delivery at all costs. And paperwork can follow on when you have time in the evenings or at the weekend. We get very engrossed and excited with delivery. We forget the assurance paperwork, the project updates, and the records that are needed because they're not the cold face of project delivery. And one big pushback that we hear is that there's so much guidance, noise, standards, specifications around this. I just give up. It's just too much hassle. I don't have time to sort it all out. But as both Dave and Stephen have outlined, there's a lot of great best practice and industry standards that can help get things into a good structure quickly without having to reinvent the wheel. And many are free and simple to follow. And you can use Excel and a Dropbox folder and you're pretty much nearly there. Avoid complicating and spending time on custom built software, complex processes which don't add value. Instead, focus on instilling good record keeping functions and culture within your business and your projects. And pretty much that will get you 90% of the way there. In short, if you get the basics right and you're on top of things, you will know that what's happening in your job. You can make informed decisions. You can help your team. You can support them to deliver works faster, safer, and more efficiently. The training and skills you get from it are transferable, so from data management and analytics skills. You can go from engineering to project management roles, even into private equity insurance companies, or if you really do fancy it, running your own construction tech company someday. It does take effort to change the culture to capture, store, and use project information in a structured structured manner, but we see payback for our clients in under 3 months. It reduces admin by being better at admin. You have more control and oversight of what's happening. And really, instead of being reactive, you are proactive. But most importantly, for me, the most we can't disagree that that's going to be the most important thing. That's it. Did I finish on time, Sean?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thanks a lot, John. Great presentation. I think what's been so nice about this micro conference today is just the different perspectives and the different angles that everyone has brought. But with that in mind, are there any questions for John? Anybody got something you want to throw out there? Don't be shy. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Hi, John. Lovely presentation. Lovely take on simplicity. Couldn't agree with you more. Excel. You're really pushing this Excelable thing. Isn't relational database systems where it's at the moment? Because I was talking to David Shepherd about this earlier, that they take essentially a Revit file, and Revit software is a relational database driven engine. You have an asset management system on the other hand, which is a relational database. So wouldn't it be better to map those two bits together rather than downloading to a spreadsheet that needs updating, which then needs to be reloaded into a system? I would have thought modern technology would enable that instant mapping between asset management or safety management documentation and the CAD software that generates it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that one. One of the problems that we've got is that within the modern structure of how to build a building, it's not just your big player who's doing it. They're subcontracting and they're subcontracting, and then you have suppliers who might be supply only or supply and install and so on. So you're dealing with companies that don't have that level of complexity within their business to be able to own, manage, upkeep these type of systems. So typically, if you're taking in Revit or other bits and pieces, what you will have is you will have the sorry, I've lost this piece though. You'll have quite a few problems with information being shared across teams, and because it's moving on to different bodies and different kind of subcontractors, you end up in this problem where having a CAD system will require a CAD manager, a BIM expert, and so on. You'll have to have information management, document control. Each one of these people is going to cost you money. So some of the small companies can't afford to have a dedicated CAD manager, project managers in these kind of spaces, or quality managers and so on. So looking at the lowest common denominator within these businesses, a simple Excel sheet using a kind of a standard COBie approach is kind of industry practice. Now, we've got in our system, we've got asset management, we link in with the BIM model, so digital twins then come into as an export, they go straight into Centera. We link in with Uniclass codes for our clients. So we use the stuff that Stevens MBS company have to be able to bring that into one place, so that when you're doing it, you've got this network effect of data going across the entire system. And it becomes quite complex as much as you want, but it has to be easy for the people on the ground to capture. And typically the lowest common denominator is going to be a folder structure and Excel. And if we can get the subcontractors who don't have the huge teams and systems and back office process in place to align with industry best practice at the basic level, that can be, those spreadsheets can be imported into the principal contractor systems. It can be imported into the client systems, the final client, facilities management, etc. They can go off and use that information as well as you start shifting it through. So typically, if I was setting up a project, I might mandate that you will use my standard spreadsheet for COBie information, for information management, growing registers, etc. And that would allow then me to import from any of my subbies into my bigger system if I was a company of a certain size that had those systems in place.
Yeah, they're all my clients, by the way.
Which ones, the big ones or the small ones?
Yeah, well, we provide support for companies that don't have it themselves. So, you know, we get involved in that quite a bit. The lowest common denominator, the simplest way is always the best way.
Yeah, it's going to get that down to, we do kind of try to push, and I think Dave has covered it, and he's an expert in this one, Power Apps, that kind of stuff. But we've noticed that Power Apps is quite expensive for small contractors to go off and use, setting it up, the implementation of it. And then there is also the management of it as well, has been, you know, it has to have the right, a certain size team in a project to get that right on. Google Sheets and Google Forms are fantastic. You get to structure data. They can't put in erroneous information in certain fields. Or you adopt something like us, Centera, which you build your own forms in it, you capture the information on the ground, and then that goes into a non-relational database, because forms are non-relational, it's not structured in any way. You can build, collate, organize data, and then you can go off and link that then to assets, schedules, locations, etc. And that kind of builds your picture of your project, which then builds your golden thread as you're going out. So that's kind of, we've just seen that failure from mega projects down to the smaller ones of, if we don't bring everybody on board the story, then we're dropping some of the key players who are the ones that are installing the doors, that are doing the works, that are ordering the ironmongery, etc., that Stephen referred to earlier. That's always going to be an issue, that if we're just looking at the high level, it has to start from site. And that's where that's why I left the industry to set up Centera, was to start at the coalface and work back then to the office people.
Yeah, you're going bottom up rather than top down.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Good presentation. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Just see, Thomas, yeah, I agree with you. Data schema is no different by database. Use a standard format within your projects, mandate that across your supply chain, that when they're submitting stuff for approval, for submission, final closeout, they have to send it in your one. And then it's a very simple drag and drop, or if you're going fancy, you can use macros or some other tools to go off and do things. Stephen, thoughts in Excel? Yeah, there's lots of problems with Excel. We tend to go off and start with a simple spreadsheet, and then it grows to run the entire business. And it is quite difficult to go off and manage afterwards. And that's where moving then into a proper system that will actually go off and give better structure is more important. Sort and play. Yeah, and not secure for APIs and so on, like and stuff. But yeah, it is. I think, Stephen, I think I might have answered most of your points on that one.
Well, and we should be doing it. And
What have I done? What have I done?
You just press the unmute button.
There we go.
I think David's hands up. He's been very polite.
Yeah,
Yeah,
David, go right ahead.
I just wanted to do, concur. I think, especially in the work that I do, if we were to amass all the requirements up front and then try to deliver a solution that meets the vast range of users, it's never going to work. So the agile approach means that we identify a backlog, which is just a time box set of requirements. And then we do sprints towards that particular. I mean, John's been doing that. That's how his development team probably works as well. But the idea there is that maybe that's a broader principle, that if your lowest common denominator is Excel, then you're probably going to have to build a solution around that tool set. But as time progresses, in fact, that was my progression. I started out with Excel, started to use formulas, moved on to using things like, Power Queries and so on. Then thought, okay, maybe I should be putting this in the cloud. So created SharePoint lists, and then it went on from there. Now, essentially, I'm using Microsoft Dataverse. But there's nothing to say that there's something to suit all levels of budgets and all levels of capability. The most important thing is the conscientiousness of recording that information. If you're conscientious, if you have a culture of safety, then largely that's going to drive your effort to use whatever tools are available to you, even that's Excel, or in Mark's case, a specific quality of drawing, detailing that makes fire safety very clear and easy to use. Whatever those tools are, we just all need to start using something that starts us on that journey. Yeah.
It's critical to do that, and it is, number one is culture. If you've got the right culture in place in your project and they want to do the right job, whether you're using Excel or Centera or more expensive bespoke systems, you can always go off and win at that one. And when you look at the Building Safety Act, you get through all this, the noise and bits and pieces. At the very basics is capture what's happening in your project, keep a record of it, keep a record of change, and then understanding what the risk profile of your buildings are to ensure they're safe for residents and users, etc. And that doesn't have to mandate something expensive, but we typically see that we do beautiful BIM digital twin models on the projects, and we hand it over to the maintainer or the operator or the facility management company. They don't have these tools. So the second the project is finished, the BIM model is out of date because nobody has got the skill set to continue to use that information. And at best, they got the Kobe export, which is Excel, and then that's not going to be used very well in other kind of systems. So that's one of the problems of that data portability, is not coming through to understand the cradle to grave from project inception through to the demolition of the building in 60, 80, 100 years time. None of that is kind of understood through the whole thing, and as to who the different users are at different stages. So we've seen time and time again, beautiful information being handed over to the maintainer. You come back 3 years later to do an upgrade and the maintainer has touched nothing of your BIM model, and you have to go back out, resurvey everything again, like you're doing it from scratch on the original job.
Any more questions there for John? I think, John, what's really interesting about about what you guys are doing at Simterra. I mean, a lot of the conversation around the golden thread, it all happens before construction begins, you know, specifying the right materials at the manufacturing stage, at the design. Can you elaborate a bit more about on-site communication? I mean, most people are doing WhatsApp. What valuable data is there, and how can that link up to the golden thread?
Yeah, there's quite a bit. I think in section 80 in the golden thread, kind of up towards 90, that kind of Dave mentioned in his one. A lot of it's down to capturing change of what's going on in the project, but also you build your assurance paperwork to get you to the end of the project and the handover. Now, what we're predicting is we're going to start seeing some court cases coming through around the Building Safeties Act. The building owner, for whatever reason, does not want to accept the project completion from the principal contractor. And they're going to wave their hands and going, we haven't got the right information at the authorized person who can actually go off and properly assess the risk assessment of this building, because they haven't got the right information. And the right information is, did you build it to the specifications that you mandated? When I look at the drawings that were issued for construction versus the as-builds, what did change? And Dave did cover that about the zinc being mentioned in the ACM panels, and it was still on the drawings because people didn't have that throughput going on. And that was at the start of the project, the specifications, the drawings, the initial bits and pieces. But that wasn't captured. Those changes, that installation, was it done correctly? How did you do it properly? Do you have evidence of that being in place? So we're going to see court cases that the building owner is not going to accept the practical completion or the handover of the project at the end of the job. And they're going to state that as the accountable person, we cannot accept this because we do not have a full understanding as to how this building was built and was it built to the correct standard specifications that are mandated at this time. And that's going to be quite exciting, because those companies that think that they can just ignore the Building Safeties Act and just bundle through it are going to be the ones that are going to be failing at this thing. We're going to see a number of companies going bust and going by the wayside. Those companies that adopt a digital data-centric approach to being able to improve how they do work faster, more efficiently, better profit margins, are going to be the ones who will be the winners in the years to come. We're going to see a lot of companies not wanting to go above 6 or 7-story buildings because they're getting into this high-risk environment and they don't have the competencies or the skill set to go off and maintain that information. So we're going to see this shift in the industry a bit more. But also, if you look at the Building Safeties Act, there's a few good lines in there that the Secretary of State can deem any building to be a high-risk building if they so wish, whenever they feel like. And I think we're going to see a problem where there's going to be a major catastrophic failure somewhere. We're going to see a major loss of life, potentially school children in a shopping mall or whatever it is. And then any building with a public space is going to come under the Building Safeties Act at some stage. And that means everybody is liable for it. And you've got 30-year history to maintain. So those that are not adopting a very simple thing of Dropbox and Excel, even the very, very basic level, they're the ones that are going to be failing and in the future. But those that are doing something a bit more than that and bring in forms and a bit more structure in how they manage data and the process procedures behind that, these are the real winners in the industry. I think in the early breakout group, I mentioned a company called Katira, American. They failed, they grew too fast, various reasons, but they're kind of the company I see as being the future of the industry. And I'm really excited to go up and see the rise of those companies, and not the companies that think it's simply about, I'm just going to throw a few bricks up, hand it over, and you'll take what you're given.
One other point, John, just I've been thinking in the back of my mind. I think that is it fine to use Word, Excel, Dropbox, etc.? I think it depends a little bit on the scale of the project. So you're a small architect doing house extensions, or a small builder doing house extensions. Yeah, I think you probably can use Microsoft Office and something like Google Drive, Dropbox. But if you are using one of these, like a high-rise building or a shopping center or a stadium, whether you're a designer, a main contractor, whoever, it's got to be professional software systems. I think, and I think there was a line in the draft that said something like suitable technology systems or something. Obviously, you're not going to mandate systems, but for those big, complex, important buildings where you can't risk fire, you can't risk structural safety, I think you need to be using high quality technology to manage the information.
It needs to have like kind of an information management system, purpose-built platforms, document management, document numbering conventions, revision histories, all these kind of things that are managed, these things, design workflows for reviews, approvals through all of the different stages of concept design through to as-builts and so on. And all of that needs to be managed against your specifications. So when you're doing a final handover, you're registering against, is this meet the original specifications, which then can be cross-referenced in your drawings. If you got your uniclass code, I assume then that you can go off and look at the uniclass code and then the original specification against that and cross-reference it. So you can verify, has it been done correctly and so on. And these are expensive. The people we're talking about here, there's about 3, maybe 4 dedicated people on this at a cost of, let's say, 50,000 a year. That's 200,000 you're spending on just this function alone. So it is the larger projects that could afford this, or you're kind of, the basic ones. We've got our product Simterra. It's built for the ground up from the site to enable you to capture what's going on. We allow data sharing, portability of information. We pretty much replace the likes of Excel and WhatsApp on site. We always replace the Excel sheets in the PowerPoint because you can use that information in Power BI. So we've got this kind of solution that will then feed into, if you've got a bigger system elsewhere, we then share that information up. So you capture information on the ground in a compliant fashion that's structured and uniform, and then that can be imported into any other system afterwards, including Excel or a dashboard or a bigger information management system that might be already used in the company.
Yeah, I like what I've seen of Power BI, and I think the primary software system you're using can only have so many reports, and having that flexibility, just suck the data out, not edit maybe in Power BI, but suck it out, do your reports, shape the data to how you wish. It looks like a really good tool.
Yeah, we've got a very simple thing. You capture the form on Simterra that our clients build, and then every single question is captured in the database. So if you want to look at question 17 for the last 4,000 reports, you can see the answer to that and see trending or see if there's a variance between different projects. This is why I don't like yes, no, and tick box questions, because they add very little value and no context behind why it was yes or no. And then that information then can be pumped out into PDF as well. So if I want to see a bit more about that report or that update from site, I can just click on the hyperlink and open up the full PDF behind it and see the photographs, see what schedule items is linked to, what assets it's linked to, and then start seeing the bigger picture around that. And that's kind of quite key to get that right. But it is kind of like starting at the basics for the industry. That's kind of where more my talk was going on, of if you get that right, and as we mentioned with Dave, the culture in place, then you really are starting on a winning solution. But you can have all the tech in the world, but if your culture is wrong and you haven't got senior management support and drive in that way, then you're just wasting money.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question to yourself, John, about the use of Dropbox? Because we've moved over to WeTransfer now. Copyright issues?
I think
Google Docs, copyright issues?
I think you have to go and read the terms and conditions and all these documents and stuff. Like it becomes interesting. I think a lot of them, they do allow the sharing. Firstly, it's making sure that the data is located in the EU, first of all, and no kind of data things. We only kind of work with UK-based or EU-based businesses and stuff like that to make sure that we're not transferring outside of the EU. I think that's quite critical. You do have the whole data sharing and subcontractors and who owns what and the IP and so on. But, I think we need to get over that. We keep reinventing the wheel in every single project when we could just use best practice. And one thing that we don't see on some projects is they don't share the specifications across all contractors. We spend money and time to do this. Why can't we just have a simple folder that's there, like, welcome aboard, you are a new subcontractor. I'm going to share health and safety files, process procedures, our risk register, and our specifications and our standard drawings.
Isn't that done automatically on projects? Maybe naive.
Not all of them, and it's not always easily accessible because people are using proprietary systems that then have a per user access requirement. Firstly, so you're paying per user per month, which then limits the number of people you want to spend to give access to. And secondly, a lot of these systems are really complex. You open it up, and if you're not a technical person, you're going to get lost using them. But if I open up Dropbox, it's just folders. I can send a link to the relevant folder or the WeTransfer, and it's there. So we need to get it down to the basic level of people's technological adoption and and understanding and literacy is quite critical. And if you throw a different system at a subcontractor who's working for you for 3 weeks, 3 months, in a year, they'll see 20 different systems and 40 different setups and 50 different drawing document numbering systems. It's really confusing for them. It's really difficult. So for them then to go up and look at the project specification each and every time for each and every project, you're putting a lot of pressure on these people who are also most likely on a fixed price lump sum contract and very tight deadlines. We need to enable these people to succeed in what they're doing and not to put barriers in place. These are the guys who are putting in the cladding system, they're putting in the fire risers, they're putting in your fire doors, your architraves, everything else. We need to empower them to succeed in the job, not the people in the office with the big computer screens and all the software, the training and the tech literacy.
I think there's a requirement for the software companies to keep on innovating and make this in the construction industry, make their software better. Because if you look, something like Google Maps, anyone, my dad, can put in a postcode, click on the place, ask for directions, stick it on the car, and it drives in there. And he's not a computer expert. It's just they've made it simple. Like maybe a similar example, I bought a car recently, and the guy put the details in his iPhone, and there was no paper printed out, didn't have to sign, it was all digitally signed on and those processes aren't massively different from what subcontractors and main contractors and building inspectors need to do. It's just the investment and the innovation isn't quite there yet, and it's for companies like ourselves and like yourself, John, to continue to innovate, look at other industries and sort of push the construction industry into what we're seeing in everyday life.
Yeah, I agree. I think our biggest competitor is WhatsApp. We want to replace WhatsApp. We also want to replace Excel. Despite mentioning it all the time, I see them as being the 2 biggest challenges for us and stuff. And we want to make it as simple, as easy as possible for the people on the ground to use it. Voice dictation, bigger buttons so that you can use it on a winter's night and not get lost in things. Simplified structures. We use What3 words instead of kind of pins on the ground, so you can tap the square that the materials have been dropped at, the works has been completed at, etc., etc.
Yeah, we'll get
Yeah, it's funny we keep on going back to the automotive sector, but yeah, I mean, especially if you look at modular construction, for example. I mean, who knows? Maybe my next home will be built by a team of robots in a factory somewhere. But no, I hear you, Stephen. I mean, it's this conversation. If we zoom out a lot, it is generally to do with the need for digital transformation, but also, like John mentioned, skills. You need people that have the digital literacy, and I guess that starts from the bottom up, doesn't it? I'm just a bit aware of time. We have a couple more minutes left. So I mean, just maybe 1 minute from each of you. David's had to step off the call, but 1 minute on just kind of, as we're going into 2023 now, what are some of your hopes in terms of where you'd like to see the construction industry go on this golden thread topic? Maybe Stephen, we could start with you. Not to put you on the spot.
I think get the basics right, all the principles, whether you're doing drawings, whether you're writing prelims, doing cost analysis, whether you're writing specifications, all the basic principles that used to be taught 50 years ago, but then increase the efficiencies, lower the risk through using great digital technology. And I think the industry has got the digital skills. Hasn't all came together yet. Like, people that work on site will be researching and booking holidays online. They'll be doing their shopping in Sainsbury's online. You can't go down the high street in Newcastle and go to a Barclays Bank anymore because that's all done online. And the construction industry will get there, and it'll make it a safer place. And we have buildings that are better for the environment and better value for the clients and the people that live there and work there and are there afterwards. Maybe over to John.
Yeah, I think from our side, what we've seen across quite a few of our clients is there's a labor shortage, as we all kind of know. It's harder and getting more and more difficult to kind of attract the right people into the industry. So taking a bit of a step back and looking at optimizing and simplifying your process procedures, because that will then alleviate time pressures on your teams in the grounds, and they can focus on what matters. and that'll improve efficiencies and therefore your profit margins kind of going forward. So as a very simple, straightforward step, I think that's kind of needed. I think we've had a very bloated setup in some projects, some companies, and if you simplify that down, it will enable you to go off and achieve the golden thread and other bits and pieces and stuff.
Yeah. So much, John and Stephen, and also to David, who just had to step off the call. But I think it's been a really great conversation. We're kind of just scratching the surface, but you know, given the Building Safety Act coming into effect and how that's really changing the landscape of the industry, I think having conversations like this and getting the ball rolling is really, really important. I think a lot of what you see is how you've got everybody doing their own thing, and we kind of need to bring it together, make data more interoperable, standardize it, and make it shareable as well. And I think those are some of the things that the industry is working towards, just from what I've seen. And yeah, definitely collaborating across the supply chain from beginning to operations will be crucial. So yeah, thanks very much again to everyone that joined and to our speakers. As I mentioned, the recording will be available for viewing next week. So just keep an eye on our Building Digital's social wall on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And we're posting up a link to there as well. But apart from that, I would just like to wish you all a great day further. And yeah, have a great weekend.